So now our next keynote address, ladies and gentlemen, is by Tata Communications. We have Mr. Avinash Prasad, who is Vice President and Business Head, Managed Security Services at Tata Communications. And he will be elaborating on SASE, which is an approach to deploy security and network as an end-to-end platform-based service. So without further ado, I'm handing it over to you, Mr. Prasad, and the stage is all yours.
Every second of every day, millions of us are connecting to the internet all around the world. And every day, cyber criminals are testing the boundaries, exploiting vulnerabilities and finding new ways to trap and take down networks. As these cyber attacks become more sophisticated, your defenses need to be smarter, your reactions sharper. But lack of visibility and context can make it hard to respond fast enough, leaving your network and your reputation dangerously exposed. At Tata Communications, we carry almost a third of the world's internet traffic, so we understand the risk of letting malicious traffic slip through the net. A network this vast could be a prime target, but not when we're using the masses of data at our fingertips to transform cybersecurity across industries. Our security operations centers harness AI and machine learning to identify patterns and predict attacks, gathering threat intelligence from IOC feeds and drawing on user and entity behavior analytics to detect anomalies and turn our data to your advantage. Risk profiling drills right down to the individual level, while our work with academic partners enables us to develop future predictive models to drive a continually evolving security solution. Armed with our security information and event management, you can move from a reactive to a predictive, protective stance, anticipating and mitigating attacks before they hit. Regain control of your network through the power of intelligent analytics, and through our platform, make data your best defense.
Hello, and good evening. Welcome everyone to this session from Tata Communications, and thank you, Samriddhi, for the introduction. What I'm here to talk about is a fairly new concept, relatively speaking, in cybersecurity, which heralds a new chapter of thinking around both security and network. And I couldn't help but pick on what someone said, which is SASE. So actually, this is fairly new, and we are all getting used to it. And we call it SASE. That's the approach that we are looking at. And this can help really enable a platform-based thinking, which became just so much more contextual in today's scenario, in today's time and age, with respect to how security really needs to be complemented with a much more flexible approach towards network and access. So as I move forward in this and we talk about it, these changes that I'm highlighting over here these are not really tectonic shifts. They have been in the making for some time, but all of it coming together and getting accelerated the way we saw it happen in a few months is what is really remarkable about the whole situation. So in terms of cloud adoption, and the what part of it is something that we saw ramping up, and now there is no looking back at all. So 94% of businesses use the cloud, and which means that pretty much the entire enterprise estate uses the cloud. In terms of who, remote user mobility has clearly spiked. We knew that users were going mobile, but the workforce itself, accelerating the way it has accelerated, has led to altogether new horizons showing up in terms of security and how to manage security, and the digital transformation initiatives. And one key initiative there is SD-WAN, the software-defined WAN that organizations were looking at. And let me remind you that in 2019, the level of adoption of SD-WAN in enterprises was about 2%. From there, by 2024, so in this 5-year time frame, we are looking at it going to 60% of deployment of using an overlay-based solution, which is independent of the underlay and which gives you better performance, predictability, and orchestration. So these are some of the key changes that we are looking at, and what does it mean for us in terms of key challenges. Now here, as we look at it, and we would argue that what part of these are legacy solutions, but definitely we do see some legacy solutions here. And the essence of it was that a lot of it was built on the private network. So what you see here is on the left side of the view is typically more of what was the private network with your headquarters, with your branches, with your data center, with good old MPLS connecting you, and firewalls in place to terminate, to secure the traffic, and to segment your inner zones. So that was the manifestation of your perimeter. From there, in this view itself, we are seeing the shift happening rapidly, which has moved here from much more of mobile users, as we saw. The connectivity model is primarily the internet, and clearly escalating or fast increasing utilization of SaaS environments. Now, some enterprises were looking seriously at, because of the greater usage of mobile devices and access to the internet, were using web proxy-based solution. We were seeing more and more the on-prem proxy shifting to the web-based proxy solution to give better internet security, and a CASB solution also to bring in the security framework around the SaaS usage. However, a lot of it still was residing over here, and this is where the challenge was in terms of the complexity, the security gaps, as well as the user experience related challenges. So how do we kind of wrap our heads around the key challenges and how we need to approach it in terms of a solution perspective? I would say that it can be largely seen in terms of the traffic flow. So if more and more enterprise traffic is going to flow through the public internet, then how do we inspect, how do we monitor, and how do we secure this traffic is the key question we are looking at. And as we know, even on the internet today, most of the traffic is HTTPS. So therefore, the ability to be able to inspect and assign the traffic appropriately is becoming more and more critical to build that. The move into the cloud, meaning that cloud workloads and the thinking around the security model for users that are going to access the cloud workload, the applications themselves in terms of what's the security framework being used for those coming like access, etc. for the applications, and the data, which is especially the sensitive data and the mandated data, let's say from a privacy standpoint. That link to that is the disappearing perimeter. How do you now look at the concept of trust? And in this, in our conference this time around, we've heard a lot about zero trust and that becoming a fundamental approach. And that is indeed coming from the fact that disappearing perimeter means that establishing trust zones becomes that much more difficult. And it's the endpoint or the identity itself, which is starting to become the de facto perimeter. Do you have the ability to establish the controls and the compliance views starting from the endpoint or the identity itself, and how do we do that? And then the combined transformation of all of these things that we just saw on the previous slide also, of cloud workloads, user mobility, and where the service edge lies, how does the access flow from there on, is what is seriously straining and challenging the current, especially the stuff which was predating 2020, the network and typical security architectures that we are seeing, and a lot of outlay of capital and funds were made into those solutions. But however, that is being strained at the seams, and that needs to be relooked at. So therefore, the proposition and the thinking from SASE, and here our idea is to, intent is to really show you more of a composite view for your enterprise and help build some of the concepts and ideas of what it would take to start moving towards that, because this will clearly also be a journey that will need to be planned and executed in terms of the strategy and then the adoption of the same. So the enterprise landscape, in terms of what are the changes that we are looking at, is from the identity layer being more of these remote users, let's say, supported through VPN and of course MPLS networks and hybrid apps, but moving on to cloud, and the fact for different web interfaces. So how do you manage these multiple solutions? So these were the different layers, and the model that we're going to talk about has to look at all of this in entirety. So we cannot differentiate across all of this and leave the security controls of each one hanging independently of each other, but is there a way for us to collapse and coalesce all of these? So there, if we move ahead to the next view, what are the opportunities that it presents us? From the remote user, establishment and looking at it from a zero trust perspective becomes more and more important. The network layer is something where SD-WAN is, which can give you much more of a performant network on the internet using much more high cost and highly available, much more lower cost, and highly available resources of the internet with a network edge internet breakout. From the application layer perspective, these applications will be distributed across AISS platforms where your own applications are running versus SaaS platforms as well. So the thinking around multi-cloud security and how do you establish a service that you can start doing your inspection and a variety of security controls there itself. But it's extremely important finally to be able to manage it, to build visibility, management, and orchestration through a more of a comprehensive common layer, which is what we call the single pane of glass. So these are the key requirements that will flow into the thinking around how the enterprise landscape shift needs to be managed through an approach. And that brings us to the conversation around SASE. So if we look at, it's the new secure access approach, and I'm sure you would have heard of or read certain definitions of this as well. There are definitions out there, but what it says is that it presents the opportunity for the enterprise to work on a converged model, looking at especially evolving network in terms of the SD-WAN and some of the overlay network aspects that we are looking at, security, which becomes much more cloud native and multi-layered so that it can give security both from thinking from internet perspective, from a cloud perspective, and establishing zero trust in an end-to-end manner. So therefore, the traditional network that we see over here is already, let's say, in some part and measure moving to SD-WAN, which will facilitate network as a service along with CDN, WAN optimization. The traditional security of defense and depth moving to security as a service with secure web gateway, CASB cloud access security broker. The firewall has moved onto the internet. Rapidly, it's moving for many enterprises and zero trust network access. This converging into one consolidated model, which is cloud native and therefore stitches very well to a mobile workforce, which is going to zoom through the internet for accessing cloud-based, primarily cloud-based workloads and environments. So from that standpoint, this is the kind of convergence that we are seeing. And SASE is the model, or it's really a framework which provides us this opportunity to be able to look at both of these in a synchronized manner and be able to blend in the security policies and controls and the thinking that you had even in the legacy architecture in terms of still being able to establish trust, still being able to fully enable internet secure behavior on the internet, all the traffic inspection, etc., through firewall as a service, so traffic control and monitoring through that, and cloud-based, whether data security, behavior monitoring, secure and segregated access through CASB. So this is what we are able to put together here in the new secure access approach that I want to present to you through SASE. Now, how do we approach this as a solution? So as we see, the dominant cases work from home, but of course, there will be some level of unlock. We are seeing some level of unlock already happening, which means that there will be some level of branch and office-based access as well. But then there's an extended ecosystem that you need to think of, which is your vendors and your partners. Now, within that, what are those elements that really help you establish much better the underlying connotations of what we look at as zero trust, which is in terms of establishing identity, integrating through across different identity sources, which will be extremely important, and using other features and characteristics like location, device, and your standard existing user ID, etc. Also, from there, if we assume that the access will be towards workload and applications, where your applications, your data resides, all the way from your data center, which still are there for many enterprises, to the cloud, PaaS, SaaS, and IaaS, and of course the open internet platforms, which are being used actively for work purpose as well as for personal reasons by all the users. It needs an approach whereby, let me just first highlight the network as a service approach, which is where the entire connectivity is established through cloud gateways, wherein we had an interesting session today. We had a workshop for about 2 hours, and where we talked about how to spin up a network within a matter of minutes, if or barely like in an hour or two, in terms of spinning up your gateways and providing and onboarding your clients, through much more of a digital token-based approach, and then establishing the connectivity in a secure manner, and establishing also a hybrid WAN approach where still the existing elements of private network are there, but optimized with a internet blended approach with the internet, and finally automation through an SD-WAN, which gives the right level of orchestration, the right level of being able to monitor the traffic. And what customers we see will clearly need is burstable bandwidth. That's going to be more and more a business need. We see that especially as a service provider, because you can't predict business, and there are boom times which you anticipate where you would want to do more and more business through the digital channels. So can your network be, today your access be abstracted from the much more of the constrained physical segmented physical layers that you had, to something which really is cloud-based gateway, and establishing the right network path, doing it in a matter of minutes, and getting the automation through SD-WAN, which is the approach towards network as a service, and layered and seamlessly integrated on top of that is where we look at the opportunity to bring in security as a service. And these are, of course, the two core layers for SASE, wherein move the perimeter security controls to the cloud, and of course use different features like I mentioned, which is identity, device, etc., for really implementing those perimeter security controls. Advancing your endpoint security will be a very key part of it. This feeds into the concept of SASE. So these are the supporting elements also of how you really make it happen. How do you really make zero trust happen? Unless you are really you can build higher levels of assurance on your endpoint of how good level of security posture on your endpoint is on the devices, because it could be a managed endpoint, it could be an unmanaged endpoint as well, which leads us to the zero trust network approach. Couple of other interesting things as a service provider that we are really seeing is that how to protect the critical links through which your entire services are really being served, especially let's say in a digital business model, let's say even for a bank, if you are serving your customers, how to bring in the attack protection for DDoS protection, and also bringing in more and more network security analytics, because this as a layer of defense, which gives you the right level of signaling and telemetry to see where the anomalies lie, aside from, of course, the endpoint and other sources, is a key element that we can bring in because of the flow of the entire traffic through our networks today in this model of, clients connected on the internet flowing through the public network onto cloud environments. However, the secret of managing all of this would be a pane of glass approach, which is where you are able to look at managing, getting the visibility and orchestration of all these three layers through this, and that's what managed services means from Tata Comm side. So therefore, to summarize the key messages that I wanted to share with you today is the fact that what it can lead an enterprise to is the journey is already on. The shifts are happening and will continue to happen. From a convergence standpoint, simplified management and operations will be a key benefit that we can bring to customers because of the fact that the underlay, let's say, is already in place and the internet utilization is already moving up and up for you. How do we look at converging the overlay network and the network security capabilities together for a customer? With best-in-class security would mean the security controls that I talked about, at the same time complemented through additional layers like security analytics, better threat monitoring is something that we really look at and bring in place through our SOC, through our cybersecurity response center, and elasticity. Because finally, it's about making the business hum and run. So about bringing in the elasticity on this global high-performance network using the power of the internet is something that we look at, and that's the essence of the proposition of SASE. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time in terms of hearing me out and listening to our messages. Thank you, and back to you, Samriddhi.